Hi, my name is Matt Dickinson and this is a video tutorial for how we did the steel wool photography that you've seen in some of our album cover and ancillary tasks. What we used to create this photo was actually something called steel wool. This is steel fibre in a wool sort of form. And then when you light it or use a high voltage battery to scrape alongside it, it starts to spark, and it's these sparks that we captured on camera for our light trials. Obviously you can't hold the steel wool when it's burning because you get burnt, so what we did is we put it in a manual whisk, something you use every day to like cook your eggs or something like that, and then we attach the bottom of the whisk to a piece of cable or string. We actually used shoelaces one time because it was just available to us, and then you can spin it freely without it being like hindered by any angular movement. Once we had got everything ready for the photo, we actually had to take the photo. So what we did is you had to make sure that we shot in a night scene, because obviously the sparks would not show up in daytime, so there's no point in doing it, it'd just be a waste of wool. And we had to find a nice empty area which wasn't surrounded by anything that could cause a fire, so if there were dry grass or something that could light on fire nearby, that say when the sparks was to fly distant and set it on fire, then we could get in a bit of trouble. So we had to find quite a nice safe environment for it, and then we set the camera up on a tripod at a suitable distance away, so if any of the sparks were to fly off, they wouldn't hit the camera. There would be no risk to anyone actually taking the photo. Once the camera was actually on the tripod, we had to alter the settings of the actual camera because there are no presets to fit this sort of photo. So what we did is we turned the dial to manual mode. The key to the actual photo was having a very long shutter speed, so we changed it to 10 seconds to give us plenty of time. And it also meant that it could ghost me out of the photo, so it made it very hard to actually pinpoint where I was in the photo. We tried to keep the ISO as low as possible to reduce the grain and noise in the image, so that varied between 1, 200 or 400, no higher than that. And then we changed the aperture to depending on what the ISO was on, but it mainly stayed around the mid f-stop, so around f-stop 10 or 11. And finally we changed the white balance to tungsten because the orange rays from the sparks were quite bright, so we wanted to make sure that the lines were quite nice and fine and as white as possible. Focusing was actually quite hard for the camera as it was in the dark, so it was quite hard to pinpoint the autofocus onto one area. So what we did is we increased the ISO really quickly to as high as it could go and reduced the aperture down low just to increase the exposure on the video so we could see what we were doing. I then went and stood where I want to stand in the photo where I could spin the wool, and someone else would use the autofocus to pinpoint the focus onto me, and then we'd switch that back to manual, so the focus would stay on the point where the wool would be spun and everything else would be centred around this point, and it'd stop it from changing throughout the photo. There are many different types of steel wool that you can find in the shops, all ranging in different sizes from 4 to 3 all the way down to 0. But we wanted to find the finest steel wool possible, so it made it easy to light, because obviously the thicker the steel wool, the harder it would be to light, and there is a chance that we might not even get the photo. So what we used was we picked up 2 grades. We actually found 0, which is classed as fine, as the best. So we used 000 and 000, which were the finest you could possibly do. We didn't really find any difference between 000 and 000 because there isn't much difference in the thickness, but we actually found that the quicker that you spun the wool, the further the sparks would fly, obviously, but also the thinner the sparks and the more sparks that came off were apparent. However, if you spun the wool very slowly, then the sparks were a lot less and a lot thicker, and the lines were a lot clearer, and you could also see the trails throughout the photo a lot better. Safety was a key thing for us when filming and doing the videos. Obviously we didn't want to get burnt, and we wanted to have everything covered just in case something was to go wrong, because there was a quite high risk when dealing with fire in this case. So we made sure we wrote a risk assessment before we went out which covered everything that could go wrong, So that meant that we brought a first aid kit out with us, which contained everything to deal with burns, from bandages to cold spray to water, anything you could think of. We also made sure that we wore long sleeves clothing, so long trousers, so there was no flesh or skin that was naked to the flames that could get burnt. I also wore a hat and a hood, so when the sparks went up in the air, and if they were to come back down and landed on my head, that I wouldn't get burnt or anything like that. And everyone that was behind the camera also did the same thing, just in case the sparks were to go that far. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.